Hello and welcome to the Bearfoot Miniatures rundown of the Forever Winter that was run by 30k Frontier over this last weekend. I went to the second out of 3 events. Basically just the 3 events run, one event run 3 times, and it was an absolutely excellent weekend. Massive props to Pete and Ben for putting on such an excellent event. Like, it really is amazing, good, great to go to. Shame about the distance. I had to drive it like 4.5 hours, which for all the Americans and Australians watching, you might be like, no, that's nothing. In the UK, we think that's a big drive. Basically, we'll be going over it just in sequence so that hopefully you can listen to my experience, get a little bit of entertainment through that, but also think about what you can take from those games which we played and apply to maybe your own campaigns at home or your own just games in general, I suppose, because there were some really good ideas that you can just play with, I think, from their pack that they've got online. With that, they've got some really good fluff that they've got in the players pack that you'll be seeing like behind me now. It's really good, it's really in-depth narrative campaign. I think it was narrative driven rather than a tournament. Now the way that they did that is they had 4 missions. It was a 4-game event. They had 4 missions that everyone played the same mission each round. I've always chosen to go with the map-based campaign where the map determines what mission you play in rather than the point in time. Now this is just quite an interesting, different way to do it. Like, I know people do events like that all the time, but it's just a good contrasting point to how I've always done them. Yeah, I thought it worked really well. It sort of centres your characters and your army as the protagonists in the story, I suppose, in a way, more so than when you're on a map and you might feel like one of many on that map. So with that, yeah, you've got this this page about Rakillion and the war that's led up to Rakillion, the traitors rocking up and basically everyone panicking, or that's how it seemed. So with this, Ben had done a video that basically introduced the campaign. I thought it was a really good professional touch to the event, and also explained for everyone that, because we all know players don't read the campaign packs. As much as you can present interesting stories to them, people just don't have time in their lives to read event packs, or a lot of people don't, or just can't be arsed, as could be the other option. So yeah, with the video explaining, I thought it was a really good sort of like forcing the narrative in at the start of the event. I know it might take a lot of effort to do, or certainly will have taken a lot of effort to do. It's not something that everyone can do, but just even a simple PowerPoint presentation, I think people can start going forwards with what they've done. There's videos of it online. I'm not going to release the video because they've got in a month another event going on. You'll have to see if they are nice enough to release that themselves. So yeah, with that, you have 4 games, leading one after another, 2 per day. Now I thought the 4-game structure was really good, really successful. It gave you that bit of extra time to think about what you were doing in the games. It had all the extra bullshit. It wasn't just 4 straight missions, so it had extra bullshit going on. And that takes time in itself. Doing 2 games on day 1 gave you that bit of extra time to wrap your head around what was going on. And also, it just allowed you to socialise a bit more as well, which is like half of going to events, isn't it, really? So yeah, I think the format was good. It's something that I think I'll be enforcing next time we do an event. Me and Phil did a poll and it narrowly came out to 5 games, but I think just having done it now, going to someone else's event, it's just the much superior method. So I think we'll be copying that. In this, I decided to take my Solar. I've actually been really enjoying, you might not have guessed by the amount of Solar games on the channel, but I've been really enjoying playing Solar at the moment. They're just a different and fun army to use. They had an interesting army selection criteria to meet, basically, for the event. That I think that is one of the key things that could be used by everyone going forwards, if obviously people want to. But I thought it gave a nice balance to the lists, and essentially what it was no allies, and this is because you had a strike force, I think. I don't think this is core to it, but the things that you need to bear in mind: no allies, consuls 0 to 1 each, Contemptor and Leviathan Dreadnoughts may not form talons, Fury of the Ancients is out of here, and in your primary force, so your only force really, you may select a HQ, Elite, Fast Attack, Heavy Sport or Lord of War choice for every compulsory unit within your force. Once this cap has been reached, an additional HQ, Elite, Fast Attack, Heavy Sport, Lord of War choice may be selected for each additional troops. So your initial compulsories, you get 3. You then gain in that 3 slots unlocked. So say my Lord Marshal and 2 Velataris squads could unlock 2 Thunderbolts and a Stormblade. On top of that, to expand that force from there, because that's not going to be 3,000 points, you've got to take troops for every other unit that you take. And I think it just gave a nice balance to the forces. It's very rare that someone maxes out their troop selections, but in a lot of cases, other selections are maxed out. And I think it did just structure everyone's force in a nicer way, and in a more interesting way. So, like, weirdly, troops, like, everyone thinks are boring, but it's actually more interesting, I found, to structure it that way. On top of that, you get a 250 point strike force, which would have its own agenda and specific tasks on the field. And that's 1 infantry unit from Elites, Fast Attack, Heavy Sport, and a dedicated transport if you could get a dedicated transport in 250. So what did I take for that? So as you know, I took Solar, and I took a Lord Marshal who basically not earned his Paragon Blade yet. So had an Inferno Pistol, Artificer, Iron Halo, Cyber Familiar. Along with that, I had 2 Velataris squads with Vox Interlinked in Aurochs transports. That was my compulsories out of the way. Then, rounding out my troops, I had 2 lots of 10 infantry squads with just Vox Interlinks in Aurochs as well, or with Pinto Multilaser. Every Aurochs had a Pinto Multilaser, if I forget to mention it. I then had a Velataris squad of 20, all with Chargers, with the Vox Interlink heavy void armour on the Sergeant, just for that bit of extra survivability. And I had 8 Command Velatari with a Command Vox heavy void armour. And that was going to be where my Lord Marshal was chilling, because he doesn't need a special squad to give out his Leadership 10. Now, with those 5 choices, I could have 5 different choices. So my second HQ was a Tactical Command Tertio with 8 companions in the command squad, 2 grenade launchers, Command Vox, Cohors, Vexilla. Why I did that was I wanted a secondary leadership broadcast, just so that if someone knew Solar inside out and took out the Lord Marshal straight away, I had a backup. So that's why the Lord Marshal was actually in a different squad. Along with them, I had 2 lots of 10 companions with melter guns. They had all the companions come standard with melter bombs. They hardly ever get used, but they did. They've got Vox Interlinks and Augury scanners in Aurochs with Pinto Multilasers, 2 Thunderbolts with Hellstrike missiles, which are basically just las cannons. An extra 2 shots of las cannons when you come in is why I took them. And then an Artillery Tertio with 2 Rapier quad launchers with Shatter Shells and Splinter Shells additional, which are the 6-up rending shells. Then I took a Stormblade for my Lords of War, which I'd just painted up for this event along with the Thunderbolts, and I really needed some AP2 in the list, something that could kill Terminators, so I thought I'd try the Stormblade. Along with that, for my Strike Force, I had 7 Seekers with 3 Chain Bayonets, Augury Scanner, Melter Bombs, Strike Leader with Artificer, Kraken Bolter and Chain Bayonet, in a Rhino with Pintle Shrapnel Bolter and Pintle Havoc Launcher. Now I took them because we didn't actually have any information on what our Strike Forces were going to be doing across the event, so I thought I've got some Chain Bayonets. I'm not going to be great in combat, but if I use them. Maybe I can take out like the lone survivor and get a kill in combat if I need to do that. I've got precision shot and rending bolters. I've got an augury scanner in case I need to do something with an augury scanner, observe something. In a rhino for a bit of protection, it's quite cheap. The havoc launcher could pin. Like, I thought I'd basically just generically cover all bases as well as possible, rather than committing to one path if we get given an objective that was just completely different. So, yeah, that was my army. Along with that, we got given a veteran of that you could choose: a veteran of Horus, a veteran of Akar, a veteran of Rakallian. And basically those were the 3 events that had been. So I was playing Rakillion, it was an ice world. My veteran was a commander of my militia and Jurgen type person from Sapphires Kane with a tray of drinks and a melter. So I picked a veteran of Rakillion, which gave you access to this special reaction, to a shooting reaction that you shoot back at -1, but then get to move d6 plus initiative of the veteran, which could be very, very useful. Now, in the 4 games that I played, sadly, I didn't get to use the reaction once, and actually my opponents didn't as well. They just didn't. It just didn't seem to come up in the appropriate places. Now, I think it's a nice little thing to have. I think it's a good upgrade to have that advanced reaction. It just happened to not come up for me or my opponents. And yeah, it's a bit of a shame, but next time, maybe in one of the battle reports on the channel, I'll be using one of them. So now so that's a little bit of extra bullshit, I suppose. Now on top of that, you had the perk system, which the guys had created, and basically you got army perks and strike force perks for being successful on the battlefield, with your army winning or your strike force achieving your objective. They were very minor buffs, and I sort of like that because I like things that help out the losers rather than reward the winners. So if you reward the winners, the gap just grows quite a lot and very fast because there is already a gap there usually. So they were minor buffs. I think it worked quite well. They were for the winners, as I said, but we'll get into later how they helped out the losers. That I think worked quite well. Maybe not effective enough in this event, but yeah, they were along the right tracks, doing the right things. And I did like how there was something to encourage you to really try and get the win, because you did get a benefit and you did get something for achieving your strike force aim. Along with that, you got the hazardous winter effects, which could range from reducing movement by -1, a concussive test, all shooting attacks at -1, and taking 2d6 wounds. Now, although the 2d6 wounds was the most common, in the first game we got no effect. In the second game we got concussive, which wasn't too bad for me. We actually got told to only play that for 1 game, or for 1 turn, but we could carry on if we wanted. Now, that was because Pete had found that people didn't play with it in the first event that they ran. And what I really like weather effects, but every event that I've seen try to run them, everyone forgets about them, and it's the same in a lot of games, unless it's like sort of Necromunda, where it's a big focus of that game, and it's like, oh, we're specifically playing this bad zone specifically to use that weather effect. In 30k, where it's a bit of an add-on, I've never seen them be used, so I don't think it's a negative on Pete's specific weather effects, or the 30k Frontier guys' specific weather effects, to have them have not been used. I think rather than sort of thinking along the lines of people didn't want to use them, maybe enforce them like a campaign tyrant, and like, you're going to use them, you don't have to use them, but if you don't use them, you play in the wrong way. And I think that sort of cuts out this weird interaction where sometimes both of you want to use the additional effects, but you might not want to force your opponent to. You don't know that your opponent wants to use them. And people can always go away and just agree not to play your stupid fucking rule anyway. So if people do want to play them, like a few of my opponents and me, you have mandated that, so there's not like having to agree with your opponent to use the additional. That is the mandate. You are using them. You've got to have the conversation if you're not using them. And I think that's maybe the way to go about it, is like campaign tyrant wise, and just make everyone put up or shut up. So with that, we get into the missions. I played 4 really great opponents in this, and hopefully I don't forget any key points of the battles. So my first game was Alpha Zulu 20. There'll be a tag with that so you can see how it's spelled off Instagram, who had a really nice Imperial Fist army. Like, there's the potential in Imperial Fist armies now that you see them and roll your eyes, but actually, even with breaches, he wasn't running, or what could have been Stone Phalanx Warders, he wasn't running Stone Gauntlet, and I think that's because of this stigma that might now be attached to Stone Gauntlet. But we were playing the Planetfall mission, and basically you divided the table into 6 squares, 24 by 24. You then alternated deployment, starting with the winner of a roll-off. You'd start by declaring a square that was unoccupied and deploying a unit in there, or a tertio choice for me. So I put a tertio right in the centre of one of the table quarters on the my left, and you can see it lined up, the big blob of 20 with its command section. They then deny an 18-inch area to your opponent, and there is some real interplay in this, because you do get a bonus for going first, I think, because you've got that initial drop to deny, but then your opponent has to work out where they're going to place to deny you. So my opponent then, I sort of want to refer to by name, but I've said I'll do Instagram for everyone. My opponent dropped his breaches in the centre, and these were really nice breaches, actually. I think it was a really nice army, but one of the better things in the army was the breaches. Really liked that they had spears along with their shields, really lent into a nice vibe for them. Along with his dread, which had a really nice shield on it, but we're not talking too much about dread today. So, yeah, he dropped a big breacher squad in the centre of the table, which then denied around the centre of the table to me. However, I then managed to drop in his back what would have normally been his table edge, a rifle squad. So I denied a hell of a lot of the board with that by having a unit at either side of the table. That allowed me, as the deployment played out, to get 4 of the 6 table squares. I keep wanting to say table quarters. The table squares. Just because when it came to his 3rd drop, he couldn't deploy in there because I'd already put a unit either side, and that 18 inches from either of them overlapped, so he couldn't deploy in that square. So with that, I got the 4th square, and it just meant that position was, by deployment being really important, I got a good bit of board position for that. Now, after deploying, because this was Planetfall, you rolled a dice for each unit, and on a 1 it went back into reserve. Now, he rolled and got about 1,000 points of his army, including his Terminators in a Land Raider or Spartan, and he was about 1,000 points, which was really, really big downside for him. For me, I got my command companions with Vox, which wasn't actually too bad. It meant they started off the table. They could have still used their Vox because they have that rule as Solar. And yeah, I just didn't get affected by it as much as my opponent. So yeah, that's how it went down. I ended up with about 2,700 points on the table versus 2,000. And I managed to rack up a bit of an early lead just by being able to spread onto the objectives. His large breacher squad in the centre was also just completely off the board by getting a 1. And it gave me that early dominance in board position. However, as the power of the Marine list started to tell, it sort of takes its toll on the Solar because they get absolutely rinsed through and just mown down. So he had a unit of Huskars come in, deep strike in, and I think, wiped out 4 things with a multi-charge all in one go, including my strike force, which then did nothing all game because they just come on from the board edge. You can actually deep strike in this scenario if you started off the board, but I misread that initially, or neither of us knew, moved onto the board, so he very, very nicely just did the same thing rather than deep striking everything. Now, by the end of the game, he basically had been on for a tabling if it had gone for another turn, but with such an early lead, he didn't manage to claw it back in time. And I believe I won by, let me count them up, I won by 3 points to, I got 8-5, I think it was. So that's how the game went. As I say, it was getting close to a tabling, and I think that's just the power of Marine armies versus Solar in this current meta that we've got. Just don't think they've got the output, or my army didn't, to do enough damage to his damage causers and carry on. But it was a really close game. As I said, if it had come down another turn, even with my lead, he'd have done me in. And he was a really good opponent, and it felt like I can just hold on and do it, and that made the game really fun. So going on into mission 2, I played Chivalry is Dead with his Dreadwing Dark Angels. So in this we had the taking ground scenario where you had 2 objectives in the defender's deployment zone, 3 in no man's land placed by the attacker, and you scored every turn. Now the victory points were all worth 1 to everyone, and an additional 1 for the defender's deployment zone objectives if they were held by the attacker. So with Dreadwing, there actually became this interplay of a few stacking things, sadly for my Solar, that just made it that little bit harder for me. So he had -1 to my Volkite weapons, being Dreadwing. With the Dreadwing Rite of War, it was difficult terrain across the entire board, and he could deploy 2 markers that made it dangerous. He then got +1 to wound me when I was in that. And it was just a massacre. I decided to use my tanks to get up the board fast so I could start scoring before, like, if I'd have walked it, I'd have been scoring turn 3 onwards, and he would just have had an insurmountable lead. So I decided to get roaring up straight away in my tanks. I actually decided to use them as shields. So I'd initially deployed my Seekers' Rhino in the centre of the board, blocking this chasm through the woods. And I blocked off the right-hand side of the chasm with a load of Aurochs, just to form like shields with the hulls of the tanks. And it worked a bit too well. They were very shieldy, and all died very fast. That then left my infantry just walking about, and were very easy targets for the Dreadwing. Now, one thing we discovered in this game with my opponent's grab cannons was that they're in AP4 now, which you don't really think about as a Marine player, and I've not when I've been a Marine player. But as Solar, that now ignores my armour. Even if I've got reinforced or I've got Void Hardened Heavy for the rerolls, it's ignoring it, so the reroll doesn't matter. So he'd miss a tank. Oh no, it's scattered onto the squad. The squad's dead as well. So it's just a few things that just really stacked up to make the game really hard for me to win. Now, that's nothing to do with the event organisers. It's not even a bad thing. I had a really fun game against my opponent. He made it a fun game despite that fact that it was going really badly for me. And I think that's big props to him. He's not, like, it can feel like you're having a crap time if you just getting an easy table happen to you. And it didn't feel like that for me. It felt a really fun game. Like, we actually had a Rhino standoff in the centre of the table where neither my Seekers or his Vets, I believe it was, wanted to get out of their Rhinos. Or Interrupters, that's what they were. Neither of us wanted it. So we just parked in the chasm, facing off against each other. But I had to set myself another objective for the game. So And that's one of the benefits of these strike forces, is that even when the whole battle was going against me, you could try and score your strike force objective. And that's exactly what I set out to do. I knew I couldn't win the battle at what is like turn 3 stage, so I'm just gonna try and kill his strike force just out of spite, you know, and kill some of his units with my strike force to get my strike force objective. So that also gave another little win in the game that I could get. That's why I think these strike forces were actually a real success, was that even when the game's going badly for you, you had another thing that you could do to achieve a sense of victory from the game. So yeah, really nice game. It was a really good army to play against, like especially the tanks, the weathering on the tanks. I thought it was all really, really nice. Hopefully you've seen some pictures going across as I've been talking. But yeah, a really good game for game 2 and a closeout of the first day. So into game 3, where we were playing the broadcast mission. Now, in this, we had to secure the central objective of the game, which was worth 5 points, as well as having 2 stickers added, one thing that I've not said before is that as we went through the weekend, we had stickers added to the redacted sections of the mission. Now this is where it made the most difference, so I've sort of saved it till now to really explain what was going on. So basically we had this 5-point central objective, and then for secondary objectives we had 4 additional objectives around the table, scored at the beginning of the controlling player's turn. When you've moved on to it, the next turn you got a VP, and then once at the end of the game. So there's a maximum of like 8 victory points available for the both of us for those secondaries. Now in addition to this, you could uncover a power generator. Now what was his power generator for? So the central objective was actually an EMP device, which put a 12-inch bubble from the objective that made all auto, artillery, bolt and missile weapons make snapshots only. All other ranged weapons may not fire. Basic, chain, Charnabal and force weapons attacked as normal. All other close combat weapons AP dash. So your power weapons, your other power weapons, and your third type of power weapons, all AP dash. Like even Paragon blades, power fists, chain fists, thunder hammers, AP dash. Dreadnoughts and automata reduced to 1 attack and may not benefit from charge bonuses. Finally, we actually played this where it was a bubble around that central objective that you couldn't fire through. The effects were applied firing across the zone as well. So it actually made this really harsh piece in the middle of the table, and neither me or my opponent had properly read the rules. So let's go over my opponent's army. So I was playing Gore Crow, who I had actually met previously at a Battlefleet Heresy event in Bristol that was run by Aaron. Hi Aaron, if you're watching. So I met him there, and he was playing his Iron Hands army, if I can speak, losing the ability at this point in time. So yeah, he played his Iron Hands army, and we both sort of forgot about the fact that this EMP device was on, despite having just been told about it. So when we did remember, I remembered just after deployment, and luckily I'd not completely screwed myself. I was actually going first again. I think I went first in every game this week. Yeah, every game this weekend I went first. So I went first, got deployed against, and it actually wasn't too bad for me in the first turn. A bunch couldn't shoot, but Gore Crow had an entire Volkite Culverin team, Predator squad, like Medusan Immortal squad, all that couldn't fire with their special weapons even, and then I could actually make a shot with my Stormblade, which for the first time ever absolutely nailed a squad, and took I think 8 dead to a missile squad, which could have done a lot of work across the game. So I had a bit of a bonus in the first turn. He moved forwards, couldn't fire really because of the EMP field. Second turn, I'd actually uncovered the power field generators and decided to turn off the EMP. Now, we were initially thinking like, oh, it's going to benefit me to have it on. But actually, I realised that if he just plonked his immortals on the objective, I'd have to go and try and punch him off the objective, which would have never worked. Because for all the will in the world, a Solar squad, especially mine which don't have any close combat weapons, could not beat a Marine army in combat. So I turned it off. So I basically we had an extended deployment phase where only a small amount of casualties were taken, and then turn 1's shooting phase actually kicked off turn 2, and I did a fair bit of damage. My Meltagun companions did some work, my Stormblade yet again did some work, and even my multi-lasers were plinking off wounds. Now, it then came down to his turn 2, in which his despoilers in the centre of the table, his immortals were all ready to charge. His grab speeders were in a position to wipe out my Stormblade, and I think he may have had the worst roll of the dice, or the worst rolls that I've seen in a long time. So he got the Stormblade down to 3 hull points, and with 5 grab shots, didn't kill it. It was left on 1 hull point. He only had to take off 3 with those 5 grab. His Medusan Immortals didn't fire at my Meltagun squad, but decided to charge, and promptly failed, whilst also getting overwatched by my entire Meltagun squad. Then his Despoiler squad charged, and I think failed, or got it. Oh no, got in, then got in, made my squad run away, and then failed to sweep, which allowed my squad to rally in the next turn, which was just fairly mental of a thing to happen. But like, beat the squad, can't run them down, they rally. I then snapshot back at him and wiped out his Despoiler squad down to 1 man. In my turn 3, I fired my Meltaguns and he failed pretty much every. He had a 5 up for being feel no pain that they get, as well as their boarding shield. Responded by advancing towards the objective and my Meltagun squads that were in the centre, and actually got into Heart of the Legion range, so was on a 5 up, 4 up, and were promptly shot off the board by my Meltaguns in just a horrendous string of luck. Now, he kept his chin up and kept on fighting, and in the end, the Marines' basically firepower started to come into it in a real hard way. So, up to turn 3, everything was coming up Solar for 3 turns, which are the critical turns in Heresy normally. Now, what actually ended up happening was after 3 turns, although he'd not been doing loads of damage, it was enough output to be taking out the hard hitters of the Solar. And I ended up with just a bunch of infantry left, and I could, if I got the central objective, I could win. And if I didn't, I couldn't, because I could never really score my own objectives, it seemed. It was at least very hard. So I needed to get the drop in, get the central objective, and for 3 turns it was basically kick the Solar and see if they died, because I just crowded the objective, and in 3 turns a severely depleted Marine army managed to absolutely batter the Solar. I think I was left with like 12 models out of my, what was it I started with? It must have been like 100 plus that I started with. And it just sort of went to show that even when you have 3 good turns of luck, it can all come crashing down, and it really did. But it was an absolutely excellent game. Really enjoyed playing him. Like, it was one of my favourite games of the weekend. The army was really nicely painted, so everything had just sort of come together for a really good experience on the board. And it was so close down to the end. Like, just literally every movement mattered to get onto that objective. And part of that was just having the extra bullshit layer in the mission. I'm all for extra bullshit in all the missions that there are, and I think it really worked well, and yeah, it was really good. So because it was so down to the wire, we actually missed Armies on Parade for the both of us, so I've had to poach some photos and video. Sadly, didn't manage to have a proper walk around myself, but that was when Armies on Parade came. We just couldn't, because it was literally so down to the wire. So then Mission 4 came along, and that was King, which is getting basically the leader of the Loyalist forces on Rakillion, trying to hunt down that leader. And I played Esoteric Path on the trench board that was knocking about, which I was actually really hoping I would get the chance to play on. Now in this mission, you deployed in the diagonal deployment zones, and there were 3 markers across the board that you were searching to try and find the leader of the Loyalists. Now I was playing against Space Wolves, and I could just tell what was coming from this game. I think the when it's a shooting army, the Solar can sort of hold out. You've maybe got enough bodies that if you just get consistent luck, you might be able to do enough damage and slowly whittle them down. Against a combat army, you really struggle because they can just sweep entire units off the board. And that is, I think, compounded when that combat army is really fast. So I was in a real uphill struggle. So we set up, started deploying, and the way that finding the king worked is that it was across all of the tables. So there was a timer put on when you're deploying. You can't start first turn until everyone's finished deploying. So we sped through deployment. We got to the point of first turn. First turn goes off, and I'd say the first unit someone must have moved found the king on their first go. So straight away starts, and king is found on a different board. So our mission then changed to basically kill points, which was then going to be a massive uphill battle for the Solar. In my first game, I actually got last man standing, so I had the most units left, even though my opponent had won attrition. So it is a real hard time when you're playing kill points for Solar. They maybe need something like a tertio rule, so that a tertio is only worth 1 victory point. I think something like that might balance it a bit more. Maybe not the tank squadrons, but definitely the infantry. So yeah, we were playing kill points, and it was a really enjoyable game. I got tabled on turn 6, except for my Thunderbolts. I actually got tabled in 2 of the games, and the other 2 were so close. If both of them had gone another turn, I would have been tabled. Now that was except for the Thunderbolts, who I was literally nursing so that I didn't get tabled. So it just sometimes is like that, I suppose. So it was a really fun game. I managed to do a bit of damage to him and just try and play for the Strike Force victory, which I didn't manage to get because I hadn't remembered the Space Wolf advance reaction correctly, and managed to get my Strike Force charged on turn 2, and they were promptly killed in short order, really. So this is the only mission where I think potentially it needed a bit of changes. Now, although realism of the event, maybe you do want 1 king on there, but if there is going to be something so specific to the event, is the entire mission's narrative, I think that maybe could have been improved by putting, and it would have been a lot of work, so they made a sideboard. Once you found the king, they'd made a sideboard that was I think a foot by a foot with a command bunker in, that those players could then move into the bunker. Don't know a massive amount about it because it wasn't on my table, but although it would have been quite a bit of work, it would have been nice if that would have been on every table. I wouldn't have even seen it because I was moving backwards all the time. My opponent would have got it, but that would have engaged like the protagonist element of the story for every table then, rather than just one. And I know there's got to be a bit of suspension of disbelief, but it could have been like, say, minor characters on each table, but just so we know what mechanics are going on and had the sort of full experience of the event. It's a minor gripe, I will say. It is a very minor gripe, because I really liked my opponent. I really liked the table. Like the tables across the entire weekend were just fantastic. I actually, if you're selling them, Pete, remember I want one, because I do. They're just really, really good. It just would have then allowed everyone to be more involved with that final mission. But as I say, it is a minor gripe. So I'll then go on to how my army did and what I think everyone could apply to their own events or campaigns or games even. So my own army, we had a bit of a rough time over the weekend. Got, as I say, almost tabled in every game and actually tabled in two. I think basically I'm struggling against 2-up saves, especially the Dreadnoughts, where I can't place a template across a squad and get multiple hits. Terminator squad's also a problem. The Stormblade sort of started to fix it, but it's too much of a points investment and not reliable enough. So I'm going to try out using command companions with plasma. The melter take too long to get there. I don't really want to drop the melter, but dropping the Stormblade I think is the way to go, to allow the army to actually start doing something turn one. Otherwise, turn one, where you do loads of damage as a Marine player, or most armies do, is sort of a bit of a flop for my Solar army at the moment, until the melter guns get there, until the Thunderbolts come in. There's not much going on. Now, as well as that, being able to take out Dreadnoughts, they are really, really scary for a Solar player. Now that's because you've got a Lehman Russ as one of your options to take it out. Now that's 3 shots for 200 points, and 3 shots with a Solar, or not including the autocannon, but autocannon you need to get a 6, otherwise it's got an armor save. So you need like 3 autocannon or 6 autocannon wounds to take a wound off the Dreadnought. Just not reliable enough. To reliably take out a Dreadnought, you're gonna need 3 Vanquishers, and that's gonna basically be all they do, is take out a Dreadnought, like in a turn or 2. Now, with that, it's actually not a great investment, because the Dreadnought's like 165 points. So I just don't find they have the output. I think they're pretty survivable, because they've got 14 on the front. They can take a command tank with a flare shield for 15 on the front. They are quite survivable, but they've just not got the output for, if you've got a command tank, it's 800 points. If you've not, it's like 600. And for 600 points, you can get 2 las cannon squads in a Marine list. And we all know whether 3 Russes or 2 las cannon squads, which one of them is going to win. So how was I going to address that, I thought? So along with the plasma companions, which will work against Dreadnoughts, I'm going to try making 3 squads of 3 las rapiers. And that's because even though they can't react, they're a bit squishy, but there'll be 3 squads of them. So if you take out one, that's like units shooting gone, and I've still got 2 units. The amount of shots with their laser destroyers will also be the amount of shots that, cause it'll be 18 shots for those 3 units. If the Vanquishers could react, that's how much that's a terrible way of saying it. Basically, 2 turns of shooting for the Vanquishers is 1 turn of shooting for 3 squads of 3 las rapiers. So it's just more of an output from them, which my Solar list is really lacking. Saying that, as I said to a few people across the weekend, I did really enjoy every single game that I played. So I still recommend playing Solar. It's just learning the army. It's been out for a month, and I do believe it's on the slightly weak side is the Solar list, but that's just how it goes sometimes. not going to stop me from playing them.
So one thing that made this event playable for me was the mini mag trays that I was using, that you can see on the channel a fair bit. Now that's because I could get the large number of infantry that I've got moved about the table incredibly fast, and it is something that I recommend to everyone basically. So yeah, if you want to get yourself some mini mag trays, you can get it from the link below, as well as there's been a discount code on the Patreon.
So what did I like about the event in general? What do I think people could take away from it? I think as I said, the 4 games across the weekend was really good. I liked the narrative drive. I don't think I think the weather effects and perks were good. The redacted sections on the missions were really good. The balance, they gave the players that had lost a boost, and the players that had won, they gave them a debuff. The perk system combined with that was really good, because the perks gave you an incentive to really try and complete your missions, but also didn't massively benefit the armies. Potentially the perks for the army could have been given whether or not you won or lost, just because, again, it's something that the losers could have experienced more. Like, I did actually get one for winning my first game, but I imagine there will have been someone that lost all of their games, because it mostly is someone that's done that, and it would just allow them to get this perk system as well, or have it say, like, if you capture X amount of objectives across the game rather than won the game. Now, the strike forces is, I think, something that everyone can take away. One thing that I would have liked is more objectives. It's a really good idea, and I just think the 30k Frontier guys, just run with it. Like, you've got a really good idea there, it's boiled down pretty well, and yeah, just run with it. I'd go a bit more varied on it, so that it's not just the best squad or the best combat squad at killing things that's going to be the best. Diversify it, have them like taking an objective for a turn. That would actually have tied in a bit with the advanced reactions that the veterans got, that gave a bit more cover save if you had the veteran of a car or other ones. It would just give more varied things. Maybe they could destroy a computer terminal, destroy a bunker, and it might actually be something that I do, that I just come up with them objectives myself, because at home watching this video, you can make your own strike force and play it in your games and award victory points for whether the strike force in that particular game gets its objective. And it just gives you that alternate way of securing a victory, even if you've not won the primary objective. You can still come out of the game with a feeling of a sense of achievement if you manage to complete that objective. It was really successful. Just do it more, because you've got the good idea, as I say. Finally, I really like the army selection for the forces. It's something that I'm going to do on the channel, because I really liked how it forced everyone to settle their army. It's not a negative to have all these troops. Like, you might think at home that all the interesting bits aren't the troops choices. When you get the troops choices down, you're like, oh, that's actually how a legion's set up. In the books, that's what a legion actually looks like, versus what we all play on the table, which is usually the better units, or a fluffy army is just a bunch of the legion specific units, not actually how it's set up in the books and the novels. So I think that was really successful, and yeah, I would encourage anyone to give a try, like the base rules of this mission pack, and also the additional bullshit in there, because it was really fun. It was a great weekend. A massive props to Pete and Ben for running it. It was really good, really successful, and yeah, that is my rundown of the event and what you can take away from it. So with that, if you enjoyed the video, if you enjoyed seeing an event rundown, don't forget to hit like, comment below what you liked, what I could say different in the next event recap, so that I can focus on the information that everyone wants. Subscribe to the channel. All of those three let me know that you guys like this sort of content, so I'll produce more event recaps, so that you can get an idea of what's going on out there. This is like one of the especially good ones, so I really wanted to get out one for this. But I'm also going to Adepticon. Like, if you're going to Adepticon, hit me up. I will be there. Give me a shout. I'm also going to Warhammer Fest, as well as a fantasy event in February, so I can do recaps for all of them if people are interested. And if you really like them, there is a Patreon link below where you can get yourself a bounty tray, as well as access to the Discord and ad-free videos. And with that, I think we'll close it out in a bit.